Well, we have an interesting one today. We're coming to the close of the quarter of initiation. And we come to the 8th face. This is the 4th face that we are looking at specifically. This name's a little bit, a tiny bit misleading, because we don't know the real depth of its source, and I'm referring to Janus. Janus comes to us as a Roman god, and I'll get into that in a moment, but it really is Etruscan, and the Etruscans are one of the great mystery people of ancient Europe. They were a startling variation to the themes around them. They were very advanced in terms of the various things we measure people by in that era, the sophistication of their society, their tool making, the artifacts that they produced, the sculptures, the paintings, blah, 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 all of that stuff. They disappeared. I mean, literally they disappeared. I mean, the Tuscany, the northern part of Italy, which derives its name from the Etruscans, this is basically where they were from. And they were an extraordinary people. And one of their most important gods was this god Janus, that, as far as we know, probably was originally four-faced. We know Janus as a two-faced god, and it's often misunderstood as a kind of Gemini thing, this looking in two different directions. However, one of the things about the two faces that got distorted in time is that the original imagery for the Roman Janus, the very earliest imagery, were two faces, back to back. One face was bearded and one face was clean shaven. And this is the allusion to male and female. Later variations, both faces were bearded. So it says something about the creeping patriarchal takeover of this. As a matter of fact, I don't think that the original Janus at all was a quote-unquote male god. I doubt it. I doubt it very much. I think it was probably the earliest representation of mother and child. In other words, I associate the traditional, I associate the pre-traditional Janus with a kind of Madonna archetype, something very, very ancient. Most people can't get it. I have been in the room when my children were born, the first two, and there is, aside from the fact that there's something absolutely extraordinary about a human life coming out of a human body, which, no matter how you look at it, is still something that is, you watch this and it's an amazing thing. But I think back to ancient man, and I think back to, the pre-Homeric societies that were dominated by the matriarchy. They were dominated by the matriarchy because the matriarchy embodied the greatest of all magic. And that magic was reproduction. I mean, that magic was, the astonished male. You realize that pre-Homeric males did not understand their contribution to the birth process. I mean, try to imagine that, because it's true. They had no idea how it worked. I mean, they didn't have any idea. Can you imagine? I mean, for them, copulating was, this was just a pleasure instinct. They never put two and two together, which is says a lot for the intelligence of ancient man. And of course, there would be this incredible moment where, they would watch with absolute fascination, the changing of the female body. There would be these female bodies and suddenly they'd be changing. And all of a sudden there would be this event, with cries of pain and all kinds of things, and there would be these males watching this, and all of a sudden out of this female body would come a male. Oh, that blew their minds, eh? I mean, it's hard for us to grasp what that was for them. I mean, it was magic. It was really magic. The female carried all the power as a result of that. I mean, the women knew. It was part of their power. They would have ritual husbands eventually that they would stew at the end of the year. They were in charge. The island that I live on was ruled by the matriarchy. Ancient matriarchy that ruled on this island. It wasn't until the Greeks and the Romans came that all of that changed. So when we're talking about Janus, I don't want you to have this sort of typical male orientation to the nature of this god. Because you see, for me, what this god represented is the miracle of birth. The miracle of birth. And in our own language, the miracle of genetic transference. That is the movement of genetic information from one human being to another. This incredible genetic chain which is life itself. And of course the recombination of all of that. The blending of genetic material. For me, Janus is the god of the gene pool. The gene pool. Quite a thing, actually. Interesting enough about Janus, and we were talking about that before the class, that I was talking about doorways as a metaphor for death. And Janus was the god of doors and doorways, the god of birth, the god of children, the god of beginnings. We get January, the very first month, from this Godhead. The start of things, the beginning of things. These are my favorite illustrations this year, I must say. I really do enjoy these. They're fun. Think about something about the face, the eighth face of Janus. That this is the last face of the quarter of initiation, and we're about to enter into the quarter of civilization. That is next week. In other words, we're about to enter into the domain of the concretization of the life and the concretization of form. And the establishment of the form principle on the planet. And everything about this face is that you can see how deeply connected that this connection is between the end of the quarter of initiation and the eighth face, and what we will deal with next week in the ninth face. Because both the eighth and the ninth face, if taken together, they are dominated by leucine. This is a very, very complex codon. As complex as we saw in arginine, that is, we're dealing with 6 in this codon. It is a large grouping. And obviously we're going to have very special connections that are going to be there. But I want you to grasp the 20th gate and the 23rd gate. What you see activated here, but I haven't colored in the throat because we're obviously looking at the 8th face. But I want you to grasp this positioning of the 20 and the 23, the next face, and understand the influence of leucine. When you think about the movement here, from initiation into civilization, We talk about initiation as the return, that is coming into the life. And in coming into the life, this is mind after all, coming into the life that we then move into the establishment of the union of mind and body together. And so here in leucine we have this incredible bridging codon that moves the genetic pool out of initiation and into the concretization in the real world. All right. Let's begin for a moment and look at the transition that we have gone through. And remember that as we're going through, what we really get to see is that it is this central system, it is this central binary that is the main switching mechanism. If you look now, you can see the pattern of any face. You can see that the bottom binary is a stable rotation of the four possibilities. A stable rotation. So for example, here we see the value C, that is the yang yin, and of course what we see here is that all of this is yang yin. This is the very base. This is the base of the quarter itself. And from the base of the quarter itself, then we move into the next. And of course what we have here is an alternating grouping. And what we have here is the yin-yin, this yin-yin combination, so that what we're looking at is the actual face itself in this bottom four hook. In other words, you can see that they are all precisely the same here, and then you get the rotation on top. You go from the four variations, the yang-yang, the yang-yin, the yin-yang, the yin-yin. And you see the variations that are built there. So you've got a chemical commonality that's here that unites them in this face. But we also saw last week that you've got a totally reversed process when you see the relationship to the same codon, but it happens to be in a different face. We can see that as we move to the next face, we are going to go from this yang-yin to the yin-yin. That's going to be the commonality. But what we get to see is that if we look at this from the top down, yang-yang, yin-yin, yang-yin, yin-yin, if we look at these two, this is directly related to this, and this here is directly related to that. In other words, we have the face with its bottom four relationship, and we have the continuation of the codon in another face, but it is from the top down that those four establish its unity with the codon. It's obviously not the same face, but it has a unity with the codon itself. See, the codon, in so many ways, is all here. It really is. But anyway, it's interesting to watch this and see how they all fit together mechanically. But let's take our journey here. And where I want to start is here with the three. Do you see, by the way, why this face is called Janus? Maybe I digress for a moment because I really want you to catch that. What I have talked about is that I've talked about what Janus represents. That is, Janus represents beginnings and doorways and so forth and so on. And birth. The 42nd gate. The 42nd gate is all about handling beginnings and the creation of cycles. As a matter of fact, the 42nd gate is part of the format energy of maturation. It is actually a gate that is deeply associated in analysis with midwives. The third gate, without question, is the core of this, the central aspect of this. It is the third gate, difficulty at the beginning in the sacral center, that actually carries all of the information relative to the way in which the genetic information from the past is going to move forward. That is the ordering of genetic material, the contributions of mother and father, ordering this into the viability of the life. It is the place where gender is decided. It is decided in the third gate. The 27th gate is the mother nourishing the child. This is the Madonna archetype in the 27th gate. And the 24th gate is a gate of deep individual pulse process, the return, in which the mind is constantly waiting for that new thing to emerge, for the door to open to inspiration. See, these four gates, they are deeply related to each other. It's so interesting in human design, a term that I have been using from the very beginning of my teaching is called genetic continuity. That is, there are relationships that exist that have nothing to do with the obvious, have nothing to do with the fact that you've got two gates at either end of a channel, that kind of stuff. Or that they are gates that are part of a similar circuit and so forth and so on. There are deeper continuities. There is the continuity that every first line has with every other first line, or every second line with every other second line. And there is the continuity that is there within the chemistry itself. There is a deep relationship between these four gates. A deep relationship. They're all ultimately servants to the same Godhead, if I can put it that way. They are all instruments of, that the evolution of mind is an evolution that is tied to reproductive evolution. It is tied to the movement of genes. This is where you get the source of people that want to manipulate genetics, that want to create superhumans or super slaves, or whatever the case may be. This is understanding something about the goal being endlessly achieved through renewal, over and over and over again. The movement of the information from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And with each step, the expansion of the possibility of the development of the perfect genetic pool. It's what humanity has always sought. That perfected gene pool. Where the full potential of cognition could be achieved. And all of this goes back to the mother and child. All of this goes back to reproductive imperatives. You don't have to see the 59th gate here to understand something about the power of the quarter of initiation to drive us to recognize that it is through the body that progress will take place. It's here in this face that it is understood that it is always the beginning. Always the beginning. And of course, each beginning is a beginning in a spiral. What we get to see about the way in which the collective intelligence of humanity has been able to spiral upwards to the point it is today. But let's get back to the source. Let's get back to the root of this. I was mentioning on the radio last week that one of the original books that I created in human design, Rave Anatomy, is something that I'm having redone, and it was a library for me of memory, trying to put down all of the things that literally I remembered from my encounter, in terms of I was given so many different kinds of circuits and things, all kinds of things. And one of them was about the three. The three is really the source of our great good fortune, I guess. Every reproduction is mutative, every single one. It is the third gate in that sense that guarantees it, that every life is a new package, assembled from the past. Assembled from the past in the sense of the three pointed at the 60th gate, which, by the way, is isoleucine, and a very important chemical relationship between the 3 and the 60, but I'll talk about that when we get there. It's the third gate that is responsible for recessive genes coming forward. It's responsible for defining, in that sense, what the potential of the life is going to be in terms of gender, in terms of what genetic material it is going to carry forward. The third gate is at its most powerful in the interregnum between the first 88 degrees of the movement of the sun from the time of conception until the personality crystal is called into the vehicle. This is a dominant time in which the three is organizing the way in which the imprint is ultimately going to work. The three is an incredibly powerful gate. I associate the third gate with the concept of the Holy Mother, and I don't particularly mean that in a Christian sense. I just mean that as a stage of womanhood, as a stage in the Godhead. This is the fertile, reproductive organizer. It's an organizer. And it's this organization that really is the story, isn't it? It's so interesting about children. You have children with someone, and it's always amazing how these combinations are similar, but they're not. They're not. It's not like you get a clone, the second time. There's the magic of how the dice rolls, if I can paraphrase Einstein. And it's the third gate that's in charge of it. And it's not a gamble in that joke. It's simply that this difficulty at the beginning is so deeply profound. It's so deeply profound. It says something to me about this codon. This chemistry. What this means if we deconstruct this. That, without this chemistry, we do not have a viable way of reproducing. It is the key in our reproductive potential. And more than that, it is, how shall I say this? It's almost like it's the universal egg, though that's really stretching things. But it carries that kind of quality. It is kind of like, I don't know how to describe that. I can just feel it. Every time that I approach the three in this way, I'm always sort of in awe. because there's so much more than what I know. Yes, that too, Elfrida. Yeah. Each line of the three has a different genetic function, which is also fascinating. I'm planning in the next semester to do a one day on the actual information that I have relative to the lines of the three, because I think it's time that I did something with that. So, we're dealing with something that is really very profound here. I mean, the impact of, Janus in our system, if you can put it that way, in our chemistry. It sets up the mechanism by which the genetic information is going to move. That's really what I'm getting at. In other words, if we take all of this together, we have a controlling mechanism for the way in which we reproduce, but more than that, the way in which the whole genetic information operates. If we go back to basic investigations of genetics, the kinds of things that were done in terms of trying to understand through breeding of whatever, animals, plants, following genetic lines, tagging them, eventually being able to see the way they move. I mean, this is where all of this is organized. I mean, all of it. All of it. And if you think about this face, particularly in this way, because it's dominated by the three, and then you go over and you look at the 42, see, there is no imperative to make more unless you're going to die. See, immortality is something that the genes give us to a point. Think about what is commonly described as what happens to a mother when it's forced to protect its young. It'll do anything. Quite literally anything. Most parents, not all obviously, but most parents would sacrifice their life to save their children without a thought. I mean, without a thought. This is where it comes from. I mean, this is where it comes from. We make an enormous investment genetically. Huge investment. We know that as humans, what it takes to raise a human. It is an absolutely extraordinary investment of time, energy, resources, you name it. It's huge. And if you really care, it is trying as well. It is quite a process. And at any given moment, you will lay down and die so that next generation has a chance to flourish. Now, I mean, that's something that has been studied over and over and over again, investigated in every possible way. What is that? That will take a human being who otherwise will do everything in its power to survive. I mean, everything in its power. It is astonishing what human beings will survive. And in their prime, with a whole life in front of them, they'll give up their life for their child. This is not love. It's not about love. I mean, we can romanticize that, and we can say that's what it is, because that's how we interpret the feeling. But it is a mechanism in us. And you feel it in your body. The moment a child is born, you feel it in your body. It is carried through the genetic continuity of these gates, whether you have them or not. It's just there. And the 42nd gate. The 42nd gate is that reminder. A deep reminder. It's something else as well. It is the force that most commonly women will feel who have not had children and they're entering into their late 30s. You will feel the 42. It is often very painful and very difficult. It is reminding you that you are the end of your line. It is reminding you that the mystery of the genetic information that you have been carrying since the beginning, you know, that wonderful book that came out a number of years ago, The Daughters of Eve, I think it was called, about these 7 sources of all the women in Europe. I mean, all of them, you know, could be traced back to 7 women. And of course, all of this is going down the female line. It's the same thing is true for a mother who only has sons. It is the end of her line. It is the end of her matriarchal contribution to the genetic pool. You see, it's in us. It's not something we think of, make up, psychologically, you know, create some kind of scenario around. It is not something you can avoid. It's deep within us. It is a mechanism. It's saying that you're not allowed to do that. Excuse me. We need the genetic continuity. We need the genetic potential. We never know when we're going to get to a place where we mix A and B and we get something absolutely fantastic. So it's not just about bringing life into the world, but it's also understanding that you're not here to leave this plane without doing that, or you end a genetic line. And everything about this is not about ending genetic lines. It is about continuing them, creating them, nurturing them, waiting for the miracle. And the miracle is there, waiting for it. Waiting for it. And then you have the 27. You know, the nurturing mother, the great nurturing force. You know, these images of these multi-breast gods of India, you know, these to be dedicated to the nurturing of offspring. You know, the commitment. And it's not a commitment that we make psychologically. It's embedded in us. It's embedded in our chemistry. We're forced in that sense. And it is the genes that are saying, look, you are going to nurture this creature because this creature carries the genetic continuity. And you will nurture this creature so it will continue to carry that down the line. See, this is none of this is ever personal. I mean, it's the thing to understand about the way in which we are programmed. We are not programmed personally. The program doesn't care about us personally. It is only interested in the homogenized success of its adventure. You know, this perfection of homogenization so that ultimately, at least on this plane, We get to see the emergence of rave, and we get to see the perfection of the denial of self and the embrace of the One. And all of this is moving towards it. But all geared to this movement of the genetic information, more and more and more and more and more. What a selection we have today. It's amazing how many people I know whose partners are from different cultures, different faiths, different colors, different this, different that. The modern world has opened up the opportunity for blending gene pools unlike ever before. This is what drives it. It's what drives it. It's something to think about, because I've talked about it a lot recently. The transit of Pluto into the 10th gate. There's a change coming. I mean, I'll talk about it next week, but there's a change coming in all of this. I mean, leucine is going to be deeply, deeply influenced in this. The way it works in the body. I think the 24th gate is perhaps the most interesting. It's so interesting to see it in this way. It's so yin. I mean, look at it. Look how yin it is. You know, it is on the doorstep of a yin world, you know. It's this, the concretization of mutation. I mean, the 24 really tells us a lot about the way in which the program works. It's, first of all, the last gate of the quarter. And therefore it is one of the ways. It is one of the arms of the cross, of the 4 ways. You know, every quarter begins with an arm of the Sphinx. It ends with an arm of the cross of the 4 ways. And this is the way of the return. And it's very beautiful, because we always think of the 24 as a mental gate. As a mental gate. But you know, this is the true goal of initiation, is to return into form. And the form is a genetically new combination. This possibility for mutation, each generation a mutation of the previous one, each generation carrying a new combination. And you know, the 24 is so cyclical in its nature, round and round and round. When we think about it from the mental plane, we think about it as this endless loop that can only be broken by inspiration, waiting for the mutation. Here, the 3 and the 24, deeply, deeply, deeply mutative. Very similar in a way, if you notice. The 3 pointed down to a pressure center, the 24 pointed up to a pressure center. The gene pool. You know. Now think about what this means from the personality point of view. And after all, we're dealing with a personality crystal bundle. And the way in which it influences us through our bodies. But you see, it influences us in another way. We are obsessed with sex. We are obsessed with bodies. We are. You know, this is how it filters through. And when I say obsessed, I am not, blowing things out of proportion. All you have to do is look at the human sexual behavior relative to any other higher mammal. And you see right away that there's something very odd going on here. I mean, after all, if you look at the mammalian kingdom and if you look at higher mammals, that higher mammals are only going to mate in season. In season. There's a season for such things. We used to have one. Long, long, long ago as Neanderthals. A season. A season. There is no such thing. There is no such thing. There are human beings who are sexual every single day. All the time. And when they're not, they're thinking about it. And of course it becomes a social dynamic and a problem and all these other things we deal with as humans in our trip. But I want you to know where it comes from. This is where it comes from. And it's not like you would particularly think of these gates as being sexy, if you know what I mean. It isn't like that. It's not the way that it works. It's just the obvious. The obvious is that we want, because of this codon, we want to dominate the gene pool. It is particularly powerful in the male. As a matter of fact, the way in which leucine operates in the male is different than the female. And again, this is one of the principles that comes from the third gate. You see, for the male, it is about creating as much genetic future as possible. Well documented. As a matter of fact, some outrageous figure, something like 60-70% of all Oriental males are descended from Genghis Khan. He had a habit of, he was a serial rapist of the most extraordinary level. Every village that they conquered, and they conquered a lot of villages, he impregnated thousands, literally thousands of women. The genetic imperative in the female from leucine, is to look for the best possible genetic material. Two different approaches. Both of them lead to sex problems, all of the things that are wrapped up in our modern sexual dilemma. And if we cut away from the mind trip, because the mind trip is, poof, and you just see it for what it is, what this mechanic is for. It isn't about us. It isn't. The program does not care that most males end up being tormented by their sexual drive in one way or another. Just do. Constantly needing to release the pressure. And remember what I said about pressure. The 3 and the 24 and their relationship to pressure centers is really something to grasp. And the pressure on the female. The pressure to be selective. It's all built into this codon. It's not about how we socially have devised things or, all the, because we've gone through a so-called sexual revolution out of the 60s, and we have all of this, this ways of trying to say that, we can function differently, that these are psychological things, that we can handle them, that they're social or cultural conditioning that we can change, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, right. Well, you go dig into your cells, every one of them. Because every single cell is going to carry this information. Every single cell is carrying this information. It's just the way that it is. It's there in the code. It's written in the code. And it isn't about us. It's about producing more genetic material. That's what it's about. It isn't about anything else. It's ironic. You can see it today. Many countries in Europe, because they've had a crash in population growth, they're doing everything in their power to get women to have more children. They're offering them more money and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And they're trying to glorify the role and, all of these things. And it's not for those women. And it doesn't care about how difficult it is to have a lot of children in this day and age. If you're part of the general middle class, wherever you happen to be, it's a real struggle. They don't care about that. It's not about that. They know that if you run out of genetic material, your country disappears. They're concerned about the national gene pool. And of course you have the fanatics in every country that are concerned about their gene pool being polluted. The Anglo-Saxons that can be terrified of dark-skinned Muslims in their midst, and that's just the latest of many variations. I don't mean to pick on them, but the fact of the matter is that gene pool is still what things are all about, and the methodology to increase the gene pool remains the same as it's always remained, and the drives remain the same. They're there. And it's here. I had one of my little epiphanies with this one, because I suddenly realized how, as we move along in the quarters, that in fact what we're seeing is the whole genetic infrastructure and what it needs to fulfill its process, which is totally different from our own. It's totally different. It's not like they have the genes, I cannot truly anthropomorphize them after all. They are simply instruments in the mechanism. And yet this illusion that we have our own lives, that we make decisions and this is all up to us. And, when you get up there on the surface and you see the way the surface is played out, oh boy. This is just a draping, an illusion covering what is a genetic game. It's not even, game is just a play word. It is, it's a steamroller. It's a steamroller. There is mutation. So ultimately, the way in which all of these things work are going to go through some kind of change. It is clear to me that histidine, the codon related to the 55 and the 49th gate, that there is no question that this is a codon that is in mutation and no longer is functioning the way it functioned 250 years ago. It's clear to me that there is going to be mutation in leucine, have to have mutation in leucine. It is a part of the general shifting of the fertility process away from what has always been surface or penetrating sexuality. The sexual drive's going to change. That's one of the, the raves are not going to be sexual at all. At all. Which means if there is going to be codon that is going to go through powerful mutation, then it is going to be this one. Leucine is going to be deeply affected in this. It is being deeply affected in this process. My assumption is that the mutation in leucine began in probably 1961 would be my guess. And why I picked 1961 is that that's when we entered into the first line themes of the global cycle of planning. And that would have brought the first line of 61, which is a very important key in our time now. And certainly would have begun the impact on the 24. I mean, the 3 and the 24. It's interesting because the 60 and the 61 are right beside each other, right beside each other in the wheel, up here. They sit together in the same phase. And they are the polarities or the oppositions here to the 3 and the 24. They're very deeply connected to each other. Again, remember that one of the things you have to keep in mind when we do a journey like this is that I'm deconstructing a face separate from its continuity within the whole. And obviously this is all working together in the same way that we see the magic of, how arginine crosses boundaries, how leucine crosses boundaries, which creates a continuity between what are general face programs, and all of this is operating in a much larger, in that sense, continuity. You can hear my chimes banging away out there. Before I close, I just want to take a little peek here at the 20. I'll get into the rest of it in next week, meaning the 23 and but the 20 is an incredible thing. I love this. It's perfect. By the way, that's an error in here. That should say UUA, and that should say UUG. Sorry for that. I didn't change it from the originals, so don't pay any attention to that. It's just a lettering. UUA for this one, and UUG for this one here. So you can correct that yourself. 20th gate, obviously, in the throat center. Deeply part of what is the expression of integration, the only existential gate. One of my favorite hexagram chops. You can see it. It is in China, throughout China, they have on pathways. They have gates that look like this. They're just gates. They're sort of like that. And there's no gate door. There's just a gateway in that sense. And normally they're on hills. As you're walking along a path, and all of a sudden one of these things are standing there. Well, that's what this image is. And by tradition, the gateway is that as you are walking through, you never really stand there. You don't have to stand there. As you're walking through, you're reminded of the continuity of life. Behind you is the past, and in front of you, is that future you're moving towards. It is the continuity of awareness in the now. That is, there is no now unless there's a past and a future. Most people forget that when they're hip and they say, be here now. That's all great, but you can't be here now unless you have continuity. And this is the continuity. The continuity from the past to the future. Now, do you hear what I'm saying? I'm talking about the continuity of the past to the future, not in initiation, but in civilization, in form. The change of the continuity from the past to the future. This is where the mutation is going to take place. And the continuity is the way in which this sexual dynamic has operated. In other words, the way we have been, first of all, conditioned to reproduce through the female. You might find that amusing. I mean, we take it for granted, but nonetheless, it's actually part of this. That it is the female that is going to carry the life, that it's the female that's going to produce the life. Therefore, it is the female that is responsible for the genetic potential, which is why females are selective and males are dumb. It's all here. And of course, there is going to be an impact in the way in which the codon operates. I mean, the impact that is going to take place here, which will later be concretized in the 23. You know, the 23 is an interesting thing. The 23 is the ability to establish something new, to concretize it. We usually associate it with a new thought. But again, this is all working together. And of course, this is in what is civilization. We have big change coming in the way in which this codon is going to operate, and the byproduct of that is that there's going to be a transformation in our underlying drives. But there's also going to be something else. There's going to be a diminishment in the fertility of the female, in the ease with which the female can bring about reproduction, and the difficulty of the genetic material to be properly assembled by the three. And when I say properly assembled by the three, is that the three will have to do an entirely new assembly in order to produce raves. They have to be right-sided, they have to be this and that. There are certain criteria that are necessary, which means that only certain genetic material can be pulled into what will be the housing of that vehicle, and certain things will not. And that when we change cycle, and the dominance of the cycle is for the emergence of the rave, it means it'll be less and less viable for a female, a human female, to actually be able to gain access to the genetic material that will be constructed by the three into a viable form. I mean, we have a huge mutation taking place. I've been able to look at it on the surface with you, those that have, taken my mystical classes or looking at the way in which, the cycle is coming to an end and the end of the fertility and blah, 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 all of these kinds of things that I've discussed. Here is a way to really see it at the genetic level, because this is the source. And remember, Janus is the god of beginnings. It is the mother of beginnings. And human mothers will bear rave children. It is a new beginning that is going to come. And when that new beginning dominates, it means that the human processes, are not going to function in the same way. They're just not. It is a fascinating area. And, this is one of those truly interesting Godheads. Anyway, I hope you enjoy that. And next week we will continue with this story. We will see the continuity with Leucine in the beginning of civilization as we enter into phase 9. And, for all of you, wherever you are, do take care. Enjoy yourself. Have an entertaining week. And I'll see many of you throughout the week. So until then, bye for now.